Time to take a few questions from the audience. So raise your hand, please. Ted Merwin, our executive
not on the
director, has you know, I can't control what people say. I mean, this is freedom of speech, right?
Okay, just is this on?
Ted
Can
has a
everyone hear
mic,
it?
so raise your hand. He'll bring you the mic.
Can everyone hear it? Is it working?
Yeah, just speak. Just put the mic close to your mouth, please.
Okay, just very quickly, there's a black Acura 2BN8540 that is about to be towed. So if someone's in a handicap spot that looks like a handicap spot but is actually sort of a private handicap spot, then I would move it.
Okay. A black Acura that's about to be towed. Yes. Go ahead. Introduce yourself. Hold the mic close to your mouth, and please, everybody, as a reminder, ask questions, right, that end with question marks.
Enjoyed your conversation very much. My name is Alan Friedman, and obviously you're, if I can say, preaching to the choir here for the most part, I'm sure. But is there also, there's a responsibility for journalism and for the support of honest journalism. Is there a responsibility on the part of the public to care about this and to, probably in history, there's always been a minority of people in any society who really care and a majority who are just struggling to get by. But in our society, with the erosion of these standards and with the erosions of interest in fact and knowledge and discriminatory thinking, are we really in bigger trouble than we've ever been?
I mean, I think the vulnerabilities of the American citizenry are now on display in a lot of different ways, and I'm not sure they weren't always there, and the potential for a populist insurgency like this administration wasn't always there. I mean, you know, thinking sort of historically, there was a relatively recent moment with Ross Perot, who I don't think was anywhere near as anti-democratic a provocation as Trump. But it was a moment outside the political apparatus where he was seizing on some populist sentiment of the outsider. The one that probably could have well been president had he not gotten shot was Huey Long. If you look at Huey Long and you sort of follow that moment, he probably had the ability to challenge Roosevelt and go even further left. Certainly, Roosevelt was worried about him, and he was promising things that could not be delivered in the same way that Trump has promised things that can't be delivered. I guess what I'm saying is I think the American people have always been a little bit susceptible, fundamentally susceptible to being told what they want to hear. That's always been a risk that's inherent in the republic, and the only thing that prevents that is, I think, more and more sunlight, is the idea of really challenging this and turning enough of the center of the country away from these things. And listen, there's some failure on the part of both political parties. Both political parties are effectively weaker, which has allowed for this. And I think ultimately we're at a crisis of American institutions where, I mean, we're getting far afield from sort of press freedoms, but I think we've been shown sort of how the margin between us and a functional republic that we thought we were, and something a lot uglier, is less than we think, and it's frightening. And it's not merely the vulnerabilities of the press. It's our own sense of ourselves. It's how much of the population has been left behind in a time of great economic inequality. There's a lot of things going on, and it's the political infrastructure itself that has collapsed. I mean, listen, never mind the presidency. No part of the American government right now is more broken than the national legislature. And what has effectively happened is mass capital has purchased that branch of the government that it requires in order to make sure that nothing progressive, that nothing interferes with profit, can survive. no popular sentiment, I don't mean populist, I mean no popular sentiment can make it through that legislature, no matter how much people say, I want this and I want that and I like health care. It can't make it through that national legislature because of the money arrayed against it. That's a structural, we have structural infirmities in the Republic as it has been designed. And they've come to the fore. And capital has figured it out. And so, these are things beyond press freedom. But I guess all I'm saying is, if the press is fully crippled, you're never getting, that's the nail in the coffin that's going to really matter. Because you eventually have to convince enough voters that, and maybe it has to get worse before it gets better. Maybe we have to get to the point where this populism, after 3 or 4 years, has produced so much mayhem and disaster, and it has not delivered on its promises as it can't, that people finally start listening to other voices. But if the other voices aren't there, then I don't know how you get started on the road back.
Yeah, where's the microphone?
Yeah, Mark Kapilov.
Mark, hold the. So this is Mark Kapilov, who's there with his mother Lynn, and runs some important newspapers in Montgomery County. Go ahead, Mark. Just hold it real close to your mouth so we can hear your question.
How do we engage the youth as we continue to report on issues that other papers aren't because we're not corporate owned, and have more voices heard in a time when people aren't concerned, that we take a longer time to write about health care, civil rights, as my dad and my uncle worked on when it wasn't popular. We have to reach the people who aren't reading so we can be the voice for them. But the method we're going to have to, what do you recommend to reach the people that we need to write about that aren't being heard?
So,
About people not reading, I had.
so are you talking about the subjects? Are the people, the stories that need to be told that aren't being told, or the people who need to be reading the news who aren't getting reached, or both?
Reading.
We've always maintained unpopular issues we write about, but we have to be able to reach the people to be relevant to them without lowering our standards. How do you best think we can reach those folks who feel disenfranchised?
I mean, one of the things that struck me as being a fundamental mistake on the part of, certainly not on the part of TV, but on the part of newspapers, which are a particularly, at their best, and at their most important, they are a more sophisticated way of acquiring information than video. Buried in the 26th, 27th, 28th paragraphs of a well-written news account is usually the nuance you need to understand why something happened. The move to video on the part of news organizations, I think, is a mistake on the part of news organizations that have traditionally provided prose journalism. It's sort of leaning towards a level of ignorance that it's a race to the bottom. At some point, what needs to be serviced, I mean, you just saw it with, there was a news cycle where, I think, was it 48 hours ago, based on the Brazil book, Hillary Clinton had rigged the primaries, and then I think by last night, NBC had unearthed the memo that said this was all for the general election. But it was down in the 10th paragraph of the memo that it said, this construct is for the general election after the nominee is chosen. And all the other language that Brazil was referring to had been applied by the news organizations earlier on, including NPR, to the primaries. So it was a non-story. And I don't think anything about television that, when I worry about people getting the whole story or the story being sophisticated enough so people understand that it's not X, it's Y, I never imagined television delivering that kind of nuance. I imagine it being, it's somewhere hopefully before the jump in the New York Times story. And eventually, I think if everybody goes to video, if we start believing that Americans don't read and never will read, I think we're kind of doomed anyway. I don't know if that answered the question, but I kind of want to fight it by saying you got to read, and we got to service the people who do read, and we got to reward that.
Question over here. Yes, please.
Surprise, surprise, but I'm not Jewish. My name is Rich Foster. I worked with the museum for many years and come out of your business. Primarily, I worked in television. I'm going to take the approach to what you mentioned about and take issue and argue with you a little bit.
Yeah, just the microphone to your
Okay,
mouth.
and argue with you a little bit about your premise about adding video. You've talked about the corporatization of news. You've talked about the Twitterization and the shortcomings. To attract these young people, though, it seems to me some of those elements have to be in there. And you, in particular, I think, this gentleman said, and I agree, have artistically taken your journalistic skills and applied them to the video format. Are there ways for journalism to make it more dramatic while still staying true to their journalistic principles and attracting people to that internet? It's hard to look at a 700-page, 700-word story on the internet. But are there ways to use what you've done by leaving journalism, going into and making it more compelling?
Let me deny any journalistic credibility from anything I've done in television drama. That's not to say I don't believe it's addressing things that are true, but I'm putting on my little dramatist hat and I'm nodding towards playwrights and filmmaking and other things, and I'm servicing a drama that allows me to cheat. The famous quote is Picasso, that art is the, and I'm not claiming, it's just I'm using the Picasso quote, I'm not claiming TV's art. I'm backing away from that. But he said,
I thought you weren't claiming to be Picasso.
Yeah, no,
That's what I thought
he said, very wise, he said, art is the lie that shows us the truth. I'm able to shape it to make my arguments. The most you could characterize any of the pieces that I've done is it's an op-ed piece. It's one person's opinion about what went wrong or what should be addressed. It doesn't have the integrity and the clarity of being a news report that gathers all the facts. I get to leave out what doesn't work for the drama. I get to put in more of what I think does. I have a different hat on than when I was behaving as a reporter, and I'm aware of it. But the other problem is, even if I could construct something that was dramatically palatable, that nonetheless captured the totality of an issue, which is problematic because if you write a story about everything, it's a drama. In terms of dramatic terms, it's about nothing. If it's got everything in there, it's about nothing. So every time you're slicing it the way the drama works. But one of these seasons of an HBO show, for the production value, is $30, $40, $60 million. And it takes us 3 years to execute it. I mean, I left journalism 15 years ago. I've done 5 projects for HBO. So good news. If you even want to equate it, I've managed to do five narratives about current events in 15 years. Obviously, that's not a sustainable model for what journalism needs to be and the immediacy and the global reach of journalism. I understand that young people are committed to video in a way that they're not to prose. But ultimately, there have to be ways to do what video cannot do, which is, in 2.5 minutes, which is a long period of time for something on the internet that is video, you can only convey so much about, and that's the way in which X can be made to be Y, even though it's still X. It's the lack of understanding for things like her emails or the nuances of why, for example, what happened in Baltimore with Freddie Gray happened. That's an incredibly nuanced story that needs a lot of attention to the details. God and the devil are in the details. And I just, when you finally get down to trying to explain it in such a way that you might be able to actually improve the situation, you've expended time beyond the realm of video. So do most are Americans losing the capacity to acquire knowledge through reading? Yes. But man, that, like, either address it or die anyway, is I guess what I'm saying.
I think we have time for 2 more questions.
Hi, I've got the mic over here. My name is Ship, and I'm an alumnus of both the New York Times and the Washington Post. How do we get people who receive their news from Fox News, Breitbart, etc., to accept the credibility of the mainstream media you cited before, New York Times, Washington Post, ProPublica, etc.? It seems that if they're only receiving their information from those sites, they will never understand this other.
Or Fox. I mean, you know, it's... By the way, I have as much, not as much, because they're not as bad, but I'm as alienated from MSNBC as I am from Fox. It's like, I want the argument. If you can't have people together arguing in a dynamic that says I'm getting all the information, you're wasting my time. But having said that, this is you've come to the hardest thing, which is, how do you tell somebody they're ill-informed and not alienate them by the very act? I don't know how to do that, because and my encounters with individuals have been incredibly unsatisfying, in that, you know, I'll say there's no evidence of this, and they'll send me the InfoWars link, and I'll say, you just sent me an info, and, you know, are you not ashamed? And they'll, why would I be? Why would I be? It's like you're arguing, like they're not even operating on the same terms. There's no collective agreement on what a fact is. At some point, what you sort of need is, you need the equivalent of Skokie, which is where, okay, you guys are Nazis, you believe this. Good news, there's 120 of you, and oh look, there's 18,000 people lining your route laughing at you. And on some essential place in the public discourse, you sort of need that with Breitbart, and you need everybody to sort of say, we're not taking you seriously anymore. You've run through your credibility. News organizations are supposed to have a certain amount of credibility. Doesn't mean they're not going to make mistakes. When they make mistakes, they got to eat it. You know, when I was a reporter, you had to write your own corrections. It was the most painful thing in the world. The son regrets the error. You know, it made you not want to make a mistake, because you had to stand up and say, and you made mistakes, and sometimes they were egregious. You don't even get that vibe from sort of the alt media nowadays, that, like, yeah, of course we made a mistake. That's our move. You don't even see them sort of back up for a moment. And at some point, institutions are going to have to start saying, I'm not talking to a Fox reporter. And I'm serious. Like, you can still, I'm not trying to prevent you from doing whatever it is you do, but I'm not sending a talking head there. Like, we're not even taking you seriously. You know, about 15 years ago, I said to the people at HBO, I said, look, I have these TV shows, I'm not sure nobody's going to care, but I'll do interviews with anybody except these outlets. You know, no, I'm not going to go on Bill O'Reilly. I'm not going to do it. I know he's got an audience. I don't need it. And maybe I do need it, but I'm just not going. And they would call me when something happened in the news, and they'd say, in Baltimore, and they'd say, can you be on the Fox affiliate? And I would say, no, I only do this stuff for news organizations. And the woman would say, by the way, they all went for the straight line. It was just great. They would all go, but we are a news organization. And I would just go silent. And then, like, you know, 20 seconds in, they'd go, that's not fair, you know. But on some level, the society has to do that and go, we don't take you seriously. Because if you get in a deliberate argument with them about saying, no, let me argue that fact with you, they've already won. You know, because they're not engaged in the same validation of fact. So you got to treat them differently.
All right, we have a final question, please.
Okay. Hi, my name's Toby Gordon. I'm a professor at Johns Hopkins, and I'm
Hold it, Toby. Hold it closer to your
Okay.
mouth. Just
My
point
name's-
it toward your mouth. I think there you go.
Okay. My name's Toby Gordon. I've been teaching a course at Hopkins on your work for about the last 6 years. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you, but I'm well aware of the great influence of your work, and I'm wondering if there is anything in your pipeline or on the drawing boards on this whole topic of journalism and what's happening in the country now, and using your great abilities to influence, especially the younger generation, since they're not reading the news.
Toby, your course is on The Wire, right? Don't you teach a
Right.
course on The Wire?
Right.
Very kind of you. I mean, we have a lot of stuff that we're trying to get made. Some of it, nothing really directly on journalism, but a lot of different. I just keep trying to slice something. I don't want to make the same show again, you know. So there's a lot of different stuff. Probably the thing that would be most value if it could get made is right now. I'm trying to develop. Does everyone know The Plot Against America, the Roth book? Okay. Yeah. I mean, obviously, if you know it, it's a little bit timely. But to tell a funny story, somebody came in the middle of the Obama second term. Somebody came to me with that book and said, "You want to do this for a miniseries?" And I said, "Listen, I loved the novel when it came out. It was interesting, but it's kind of an artifact. Country's kind of headed in the right direction in some." It's becoming more pluralistic. I mean, we just elected, an African American. I'm not sure this, go with God, not me. And I called him back after Trump and said, you were right. If I'd have only listened to you. So we're trying. And that has part of the media culture there, if you've read the book, is sort of what's gone wrong when a popular or populist sentiment overwhelms fact. The people who try to stand up against it in the book, Winchell and LaGuardia, are made vulnerable. So I think there would be some tonalities there that if it could get made in time, but again, it's who knows what gets made. There's no green light on it yet.
Well,
But I just want to say,
yeah.
So I'm here at this shul at Beth Am. At the time that my son was growing up, I was he was living in Howard County, and so we were at a shul out there. And it was time to come back in to the city, and I really wanted to re-engage with the idea of the city. And the article that you referred to was about the Beth Am's sense of being in the city and its address of city issues. And I was very proud to join here because I felt like I'd finally found a dynamic that could sort of marry, my sort of Jewish life, as stunted as it is, with an institution. So I'm not surprised I'm doing this here now and that you're sponsoring this series. The shul also sponsored something we did on immigration earlier this year. It's the best part of, it's the part of Judaism that always worked for me, was the social engagement. And I'm really delighted that this synagogue is so engaged in that. So I want to thank the rabbi for that. And also, the shul that I fail to attend regularly must be conservative.
Appreciate it. How about another round of applause for David Simon? I have something for you. So a small token of appreciation. By the way, I want to put in a plug for a show about rabbis. I don't know if there's a lot of a market for it, but maybe this will inspire you. This was a suggestion. I haven't read. It's a new book by Eddie Portnoy. It's called Bad Rabbi. And other strange but true stories from the Yiddish press. So this is recommended by a fellow Beth Amer, Zach Burger, who's a Yiddishist, and I don't know if Zach's here today, but hopefully you'll enjoy it. It strikes me as sort of like true crime from the Yiddish press, is what I'm thinking.
Now I have something.
So that exactly. But thank you again for this. We really appreciate your time. The next one is the first Shabbos of December. Look forward to seeing you at the other event.